June 1991's weighted push scores, and we've got WCW and NWA World Champion Ric Flair in at number one for the second month running, as WCW held their Clash of the Champions 15 TV special with Flair versus Bobby Eaton, while the WWF had a pretty uneventful month of house shows, broadly maintaining the status quo. I'll update the rolling PMP50 as usual at the end of this month's top 10. So, at the top of the WCW card this month, Ric Flair beat the new TV champion, beautiful Bobby Eaton, in a career high number 4 this month in a best of 3 falls main event to retain the world title at Clash 15. And I'll pause briefly over that bout because it really was a huge match for beautiful Bobby, by far his biggest as a singles wrestler. He stands toe to toe with Flair and actually dominates him with mat wrestling to start. The fans are solidly behind Eaton, and he hits a neck breaker, a slam, an Alabama Jam top rope leg drop to pin Flair and win the first fall. It's excellent stuff. Flair's favouring his neck as the second fall begins, and all the momentum looks to be with Bobby, but Flair knocks him off the top rope and Eaton hurts his leg, Flair taking the second fall by countout. Fall 3 and Bobby's leg is hurt, so Flair smells blood and targets it relentlessly, quickly hitting the figure 4 and using the ropes for leverage behind the referee's back. Eaton hangs on but is in too much pain and eventually gets pinned while still in the hold. So this was a good match, but not the great match it might have been given the talent involved, with a sense it ended up frustratingly rushed because WCW had tried to cram way too much else onto the card before it. With 11 matches and 4 separate in-ring segments on a 2-hour show, there was just way too much going on at Clash 15, but it certainly made for an eventful show. Because we also had US champion Lex Luger, who's in at number 5 for June, beating New Japan's Great Muta in a short match to become number 1 contender, and Luger would now face Flair for their third major program in 3 years next month at the Great American Bash pay-per-view. Well, that was the plan. That was the plan anyway. We'll have more on those plans going completely belly up next month. WCW World and IWGP Tag Team Champions, the Steiner Brothers, are in at number 9. They beat New Japan's Masa Chono and Hiroshi Hase in a great little match that I'll probably call my match of the month for June. Again, it's a relatively short match, but these guys work snug with each other. Chono boots Rick in the head so hard that his headgear breaks apart, and he gets a nice little receipt for it too. Chono gets an STF on Rick while Hase and Scott brawl on the floor. Scott eventually tags in and explodes with his usual clotheslines and suplexes, retaining the belts with a Frankensteiner on Hase. And finally for WCW, in at number 10, we've got Nikita Koloff, who was getting an absolute mega push in mid-91 before he just abruptly disappeared again. Nikita was essentially positioned as the number 2 heel in the company behind Flair, targeting both Luger and Sting. He actually lost to Sting at Clash 15, but it was booked as basically a fluke win for Sting after Koloff completely dominated him. And then Nikita attacked Sting later in the show to keep that feud going. That latter attack was actually a great spot where Nikita attacks Sting as he meets a young fan, and the fan's mum climbs over the guardrails to protect the kid. I had no earthly idea watching it if the mum and kid were genuine audience members or plants, so I went back and checked the observers, which said it was Kevin Sullivan's son and Big Josh's wife playing the parts. But regardless, Koloff just comes across as a total monster during the bit. It's absolutely fantastic. Bubbling under the top 10 for WCW for June, as well as Sting, the Horsemen, and there were only 3 of them now that Sid Vicious had left. The Horsemen team of Arn Anderson and Barry Windham beat El Gigante and Flying Brian Pillman in a loser leaves WCW match. Pillman subsequently started appearing as the masked Yellow Dog. Ricky Morton unexpectedly turned heel and joined Terence Taylor in the York Foundation, who were feuding with Dustin Rhodes and Big Josh. US Tag Team Champions, the Fabulous Freebirds, added a third member, Bad Street, which was Brad Armstrong under a mask, and the returning one-man gang, as well as new signings, the Diamond Stud, Stunning Steve Austin, and PN News were all getting good pushes too. There was a lot going on in WCW with Dusty Rhodes' booking in mid-91. Not all of it hit, but it was just nice to see at least a semblance of structure and coherence in the company's booking again after the mess that was 1990. What could possibly go wrong now? Tune in next month to find out. Turning to the WWF, by contrast, there wasn't a whole lot going on this month, at least not in the ring. Back before the days of monthly pay-per-views, or PLEs, the stretch between WrestleMania and SummerSlam was traditionally a bit of a quieter one for the WWF. And it was the same for this year. The two major house show programs remained World Champion Hulk Hogan in at number 2 versus Sgt Slaughter in at number 3, as well as the Ultimate Warrior versus The Undertaker, who both come in just outside the top 10 for June. Hogan continued getting the better of Slaughter in Desert Storm matches, while Warrior had started to assert a bit more regular dominance over The Undertaker in body bag matches. Also bubbling under the top 10 for the WWF, Jake Roberts versus Earthquake looked to be ending their feud, with Jake broadly victorious as Quake just began teaming with Tugboat, who is now being dubbed Typhoon after turning heel in a match against the Bushwhackers, and aligning himself with Earthquake and Jimmy Hart as the new Natural Disasters tag team. The Nasty Boys remained tag team champions, Mr. Perfect remained Intercontinental Champion, Colonel Mustafa, the Mountie, and Erwin R. Shyster, which was Mike Rotunda's new tax collector gimmick, were pushed strong as heels, with the Big Boss Man and Texas Tornado both kept strong on the face side as well. But the bigger news for the WWF was outside the ring, as the trial of Dr. George Zahorian selling steroids to wrestlers began making news. And that was only going to get bigger as the year rolled on. To All Japan next, and we had AJPW World Tag Team Champions Stan Hansen and Danny Spivey, who are in at number 6, successfully defending against the Tsuruta Gun team of Triple Crown Champion Jumbo Tsuruta, who's in at number 8, and his protege Akira Taue at this month's big Budokan Hall show, with foreigners Steve Williams, Terry Gordy, and Richard Slinger all being booked well. Also, I'm just going to pause briefly on the Hansen and Spivey versus Jumbo and Taue match, because again, Giant Baba's booking was so good here. Akira Taue, as I've mentioned before, had initially been positioned alongside Misawa, Kobashi and Kawada as one of the Super Generation Army faction of Rising Stars, but then he turned on the other young guys and joined Jumbo and the veteran stable instead, kind of as a hired gun, but also wanting to prove himself to Jumbo as worthy of standing next to him rather than defeating him. The story of the match here is that Hansen and Spivey take out Taue early on and then spend the majority of the match beating up Jumbo. Jumbo goes to make the tag, but Taue's out cold on the floor. Eventually Taue recovers and tags in, almost gets pinned a couple of times, but Jumbo keeps saving him. And finally, Hansen holds Jumbo at bay while Spivey pins Taue with multiple DDTs to retain. I've talked about Giant Baba's booking before, but again, it's just such good storytelling that Jumbo's getting too old to do everything on his own, but Taue's still not quite at the level he needs to be yet to stand shoulder to shoulder with the main eventers as an equal. This particular match, it wasn't an all-time classic or anything, but it was just such great long-term storytelling, utilising a relatively small roster brilliantly. To New Japan, and IWGP champion Tatsumi Fujinami comes in at number 7, Fujinami defending against martial artist Masashi Aoyagi in a kind of worked shoot fight that Inoki loved booking. Fujinami also aligned and teamed with Kijimoto and Shinya Hashimoto for much of the month. And outside of the top 10 for New Japan, Riki Choshu remained the Greatest 18 champion, and Jushin Liger beat Norio Honaga to regain the IWGP Junior Heavyweight title. So, Super quick roundup of companies outside the top 10 and then on to the PMP50 update. In the USWA, champion Jerry Lawler was healed up and back in Memphis and now had his USWA Texas nemesis Eric Embry bringing in Leatherface, yes, actual Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This was, I think from memory, the last month the USWA promoted in both Memphis and Dallas because the Global Wrestling Federation was about to launch out of Dallas on ESPN, and USWA would then kind of retreat back into Memphis for good. EMLL were back in the Arena Mexico, with rising star Conan being given a major push as a top technical alongside the likes of Atlantis, Rayo de Jalisco Jr., Kato Kung Lee, and Vampiro Canadiense. EMLL was in the process of rebranding to CMLL, and Booker Antonio Pena made Conan the inaugural CMLL World Heavyweight Champion, beating veteran Cien Caras for that new belt. Other major rudos at this point were Satanico, his cohorts MS Uno and Massacre, Los Dinamitas, Massacre, Mascara Anno 2000 and Universo 2000 and Sangre Chicana, with mid-card foreigner rudos like Nitron and Fabuloso Blondie strong there as well. It was a really interesting time for EMLL/CMLL because there was a modernizing faction inside the promotion led by the likes of Pena and Conan pushing for younger and more flamboyant talent on top that was being resisted strongly by the lucha traditionalists there. It would all ultimately result in the formation of AAA breaking away from CMLL the following year. But for now, that battle for the future of lucha was all playing out inside EMLL itself. Finally in Japan, SWS were hosting WWF stars on a tour this month, including the retired Randy Savage, and pushing native star Yoshiaki Yatsu strongly over there. So, how do the push scores for June 91, a relatively low scoring month in the grand scheme of things, affect the rolling PMP50? As ever, the PMP50 updates on a rolling month-by-month basis with weighted push scores for each company, so we subtract the points for June 1990 and add the scores for June 91 to cover the 12-month period of July 1990 to June 91. The Ultimate Warrior, Hulk Hogan and Sgt Slaughter remain numbers 1, 2 and 3 for the 12-month period. Warrior holding the WWF World title for 7 months over this period, Hogan for 3 and Slaughter for 2. Hogan's 12-month push scores were actually rapidly closing in on Warriors, though, and I'd expect them to flip places somewhere around SummerSlam. Flair and Sting remain 4 and 5. IWGP champion Tatsumi Fujinami bumps up to 6, Savage falls to 7, Earthquake moves back up to 8 thanks to his high-profile feud against Jake the Snake, Mr. Perfect drops to 9, and Texas Tornado sneaks back into the top 10, still getting a strong upper mid-card push in the WWF at this point. Hansen, Jumbo, Legion of Doom, Choshu and DiBiase complete the top 15. Significant movers in the top 30 are the Steiner brothers, who continue to move up to 18 as the WCW World and IWGP Tag Team Champions. The Big Boss Man moves back up to 20, working a summer WWF feud against the Mountie. The Undertaker jumps up a further 7 spots to 23 thanks to his ongoing program against the Ultimate Warrior, with Jake Roberts moving back up to 26 and Lex Luger recovering 10 spots back to 27 as Luger cycled back up into WCW's main event picture again after basically a year stuck in the mid-card as US champion there. Further down the top 50, WCW's El Gigante continues to rise at 32, as do USWA champion Jerry the King Lawler at 38 and WWF Tag Team Champions the Nasty Boys at 40. 2 new entries this month, signified by the yellow circles. Dangerous Danny Spivey at 41, primarily making the 50 due to his All Japan main event run alongside Stan Hansen, but also having racked up points with WCW appearances. And EMLL veteran Rayo de Jalisco Jr. returning to the 50 at 49. So with Spivey and Jalisco debuting, we say goodbye this month to Dusty Rhodes and to Superfly Jimmy Snuka. And that leaves us with the WWF still dominant with 29 out of the 50 spots, WCW still with 9, New Japan and All Japan with 5 spots each, and 1 apiece for the USWA and EMLL. So that's it for June. Join me next time for July 1991 and the absolute mess that surrounded the WCW Great American Bash pay-per-view, the shock departure of Ric Flair from WCW, and the ongoing quagmire of the WCW/NWA World title situation. Please do like, share, subscribe, leave any comments below, and keep watching as we plough on through 1991, looking at who was being pushed hardest and where. Thanks for watching. Cheers.